What would you do if you walked into a hospital room and found your husband tenderly holding another woman's pregnant belly while your mother-in-law stood there calling you worthless and barren? But what they didn't know was that I was hiding the biggest secret of all. And when the truth finally came out, it would destroy them in ways they never saw coming. So if you want to witness the most shocking revenge story where karma hits harder than anyone expected, then keep watching till the end, because this twist will leave you speechless. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell, because we bring you the most incredible real-life stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Now, let's dive into this unbelievable tale of betrayal, lies, and the sweetest revenge ever served cold. The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospital flickered above me as I walked through the sterile corridors, clutching a thermos of homemade chicken soup that I had spent 3 hours preparing, because that's what devoted wives do when their husbands are supposedly recovering from a severe car accident. At least, that's what Marcus had told me over the phone 2 days ago, when he said he needed to stay at the hospital for observation, and that I shouldn't worry, and that his mother was there taking care of him. But something felt wrong in the pit of my stomach, something that had been gnawing at me for months now. The late-night phone calls he would take in the bathroom, the way he flinched when I touched him, the credit card statements showing purchases at jewelry stores I had never received gifts from, and the most painful detail of all, the way he had stopped looking at me with love in his eyes after we had been trying for a baby for 3 years, and every pregnancy test came back negative. While his mother, Helen, that venomous woman, would make snide comments at family dinners about how her son deserved a real woman who could give him children, who could continue the family legacy, who wasn't defective like me. And Marcus never defended me, not once. He would just sit there cutting his steak in silence while I felt my heart break into smaller and smaller pieces. But I stayed because I loved him, because I believed in the vows we took 5 years ago, because I thought eventually he would see how much I sacrificed for him, how I gave up my career as a pediatric surgeon to support his business ventures, how I took care of his aging parents, how I smiled through every humiliation. But today, something made me leave work early. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was the way his secretary stammered when I called the office asking for him. Maybe it was the universe finally deciding to show me the truth I needed to see. So I drove to the hospital, my hands trembling on the steering wheel, my mind racing with possibilities, trying to convince myself I was being paranoid, that there was a reasonable explanation for everything. When I reached the 4th floor, the nurse at the station told me Marcus was in room 427, and I thanked her with a smile that didn't reach my eyes as I walked down that endless hallway, each step feeling heavier than the last, until I stood outside his door and heard laughter. His laughter, the sound I hadn't heard directed at me in over a year. And then I heard another voice, soft, feminine, giggling, followed by Helen's unmistakable shark tone saying something I couldn't quite make out. And my hand reached for the door handle, and I pushed it open without knocking. And the scene before me crystallized into a nightmare that would be burned into my memory forever. Because there was Marcus, sitting up in bed, looking perfectly healthy, no bandages, no injuries, his arm wrapped around a beautiful young woman with flowing auburn hair and a very obviously pregnant belly that he was caressing with such tenderness, such adoration, while Helen stood at the foot of the bed, holding what appeared to be baby clothes. And all 3 of them turned to look at me with expressions ranging from shock to guilt to pure disdain. And the thermos slipped from my hands, crashing to the floor, spilling soup everywhere. But I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what I was seeing, until Helen's voice cut through the silence like a knife, saying, "Well, well, look who finally decided to show up, the barren wife who can't even fulfill her basic duty as a woman." And Marcus didn't tell her to stop, didn't defend me, didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. Instead, he tightened his arm around the pregnant woman and said, "Emma, this is Claire. She's carrying my baby, the child you could never give me." And I felt something inside me die right there in that hospital room, surrounded by the wreckage of my marriage and my dignity. But then something else awakened, something cold and calculating, because they didn't know what I knew. They had no idea about the medical reports I had been hiding, or the doctor's appointments I had been secretly attending, or the real reason I had been working late at the research facility for the past 2 months. And as I stood there watching them wait for me to break down and cry, I felt my lips curve into a smile that Marcus shifted uncomfortably, because this wasn't the meek, submissive Emma they thought they knew. And I said in a voice so calm it surprised even me, "Congratulations, Marcus. I hope you'll both be very happy together." And then I turned and walked away, ignoring Helen's shouted insults, ignoring Marcus calling after me, telling me to wait, we need to talk, ignoring the nurses staring as I passed their station. And when I got to my car, I sat in the driver's seat and let out a breath I didn't know I was holding, because the game had just begun, and they had no idea who they were really dealing with. The next few days passed in a blur, as I moved through the motions of normal life while secretly putting my plan into action. And it wasn't a plan born of mere anger or hurt feelings. No, this was something far more intricate, far more devastating, because I had always been 10 steps ahead, even when they thought I was blind to their affair, which had apparently been going on for 8 months, while Claire worked as a receptionist at Marcus's company, and Helen had been facilitating everything, even helping them find an apartment where Marcus would visit Claire on his supposed business trips. And I knew all of this because 3 months ago, I had hired a private investigator after finding a woman's earring in Marcus's car, an earring that definitely wasn't mine. And the investigator had given me folders full of photographs, timestamps, hotel receipts, everything I needed to destroy Marcus legally. But I had waited because I needed the timing to be perfect. And now it was, especially since what they didn't know was that I wasn't barren at all. In fact, the medical reports I had received 2 months ago confirmed what I had suspected for years. Marcus was the one with fertility issues, severe ones that made natural conception nearly impossible. His sperm count was so low that the doctors had been amazed we had even tried for as long as we did without success. But I had never told him about getting him tested secretly during one of his routine checkups, because I wanted to see how far his cruelty would go, how long he would blame me for something that was his failing. And when I finally told my supervisor at the research facility about my situation, he had done something extraordinary. He had connected me with a specialist who worked with women in abusive marriages, women who needed a way out. And this specialist had helped me document everything, not just the affair, but Marcus's financial crimes, the money he had been embezzling from his own company to fund his lifestyle with Claire, the tax evasion, the fraudulent business deals. And I had copies of everything, stored in 3 separate locations, including with my lawyer, who was now drafting divorce papers that would leave Marcus with nothing. But I wasn't done yet, because the universe has a sense of humor. And 2 weeks after that horrible hospital scene, I started feeling nauseous in the mornings. And at first I thought it was stress, but then I took a pregnancy test, just to rule it out. And I stared at those 2 pink lines for a full 10 minutes, unable to believe what I was seeing, because it was impossible. Marcus couldn't have children. That's what the doctor said. Unless... And then I remembered Dr. Raymond, the kind fertility specialist I had been seeing, who had suggested we try IVF, using donor sperm as a last resort. And I had agreed 3 months ago, going through the procedure in secret, because I wanted to prove to myself that I could be a mother, that there was nothing wrong with me. And now, here I was, 6 weeks pregnant, while my husband flaunted his pregnant mistress, and I laughed until tears streamed down my face, because this was perfect. This was poetic justice at its finest. Meanwhile, Marcus had moved out of our house without even discussing it properly. He just sent Helen to pack his things while I was at work, and I let them take whatever they wanted, because material possessions meant nothing to me anymore. What mattered was the plan, and phase 2 was about to begin, which involved me showing up at Marcus's company headquarters unannounced, walking past his shocked secretary straight into the boardroom where he was having a meeting with potential investors. And I placed a folder on the table in front of him and said, "I thought you should see these before you sign any new deals." And Marcus opened the folder and his face went white as he looked at copies of all his financial crimes laid out in perfect detail, with bank statements and forged documents. And suddenly, those investors were very interested in what was happening. And I turned to them with a professional smile and said, "Gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption, but I thought you should know that the company you're about to invest in is currently under investigation, and I suggest you speak with your legal teams before proceeding." And then I walked out, leaving chaos in my wake. And that evening, Marcus showed up at the house, banging on the door, screaming that I had ruined him, that I had no right to interfere with his business. And I opened the door with a calmness that seemed to infuriate him more. And I said, "You ruined yourself, Marcus. I just made sure everyone knew about it." And he raised his hand as if to strike me, but then Helen appeared behind him, grabbing his arm, telling him not to give me ammunition for an assault charge, because even she knew they were in trouble now. And as they stood there on my doorstep, I placed my hand on my still flat stomach in a gesture so subtle they almost missed it. But Marcus saw, and his eyes widened, and he stammered, "Are you—" And I smiled sweetly and said, "What does it matter, Marcus? You made it very clear I'm barren, member?" And I closed the door in their faces. The next 3 months were a whirlwind of legal battles and shocking revelations, because once I had exposed Marcus's fraud, the authorities got involved. And it turned out he had been involved in schemes far worse than I had imagined, including using company funds to pay for Claire's luxury apartment and her medical bills. And when the investors pulled out, Marcus's company went bankrupt almost overnight, and he lost everything: the house, the cars, the reputation. While I filed for divorce, citing adultery, fraud, and emotional abuse, and my lawyer, who was the best in the state, made sure that I would get the house and a significant settlement, since everything had been purchased with money Marcus had essentially stolen. And during one of the court hearings, Claire showed up, 8 months pregnant, now looking exhausted and frightened, because Marcus had apparently started blaming her for everything, telling her that if she hadn't gotten pregnant, none of this would have happened. And I saw her sitting in the courtroom crying, and despite everything she had done to me, I felt a moment of pity, because she was just another victim of Marcus's manipulation, a young woman who had believed his lies about his terrible wife who wouldn't give him children. And after the hearing, I approached her in the hallway, and she flinched, expecting me to attack her. But instead, I said softly, "I hope you know that he's been lying to you too, Claire. He can't have children naturally. His sperm count is almost non-existent. So whoever the father of your baby is, it's definitely not Marcus." And I watched the color drain from her face as the implications hit her, and she whispered, "What are you talking about?" And I handed her a copy of Marcus's medical records, the same ones I had obtained months ago. And I said, "Take this to a lawyer, get a paternity test, protect yourself and your child, because when Marcus finds out that baby isn't his, he will destroy you." And I walked away, leaving her standing there with trembling hands clutching those papers. And 2 weeks later, the DNA results came back, and the entire family was thrown into chaos, because the baby wasn't Marcus's. It belonged to his business partner, James, who had apparently also been having an affair with Claire. And when Marcus found out, he completely unraveled, showing up at Claire's apartment, causing such a scene that neighbors called the police, and he was arrested for disturbing the peace and violating a restraining order Claire had filed. And Helen, who had been so self-righteous about bloodlines and legacy, was confronted with the fact that she had been celebrating and preparing for a grandchild that wasn't even related to her. And she suffered a minor stroke from the stress and had to be hospitalized, ironically in the same hospital where this whole nightmare had begun. And during all of this, I was quietly preparing for my own journey into motherhood, attending prenatal appointments, decorating a nursery in the house that was now solely mine, reconnecting with friends and family I had neglected during my marriage, and finding peace in the simple joy of feeling my baby move inside me. And when I was 7 months pregnant, I ran into Marcus at a coffee shop, and he looked terrible, unshaven, living in a small apartment, working a minimum wage job because no company would hire him after his fraud conviction. And he saw my pregnant belly, and his face crumpled, and he said, "Emma, please, I'm sorry. I was wrong about everything. I love you. I always loved you." And I looked at this man who had systematically destroyed my self-worth, who had allowed his mother to abuse me, who had flaunted his mistress in my face, and I felt nothing. No anger, no pain, just a profound emptiness where my love for him used to be. And I said, "Marcus, you don't love me. You never did. You loved the idea of a perfect wife who would tolerate your cruelty, but that woman is gone, and you need to stay away from me and my child." And he grabbed my arm desperately, asking, "Whose baby is it, Emma? Who?" And I pulled away and said, "That's none of your business, but I'll tell you this much. I'm going to be an amazing mother, and my child will grow up knowing they are loved unconditionally, something you never understood." And I left him standing there, broken and alone. And 3 months later, I gave birth to a beautiful, healthy baby girl with my best friend Sarah by my side, coaching me through contractions. And when they placed my daughter in my arms, I looked into her tiny, perfect face, and I knew that everything I had endured, every moment of pain and humiliation, had led me to this moment. And I named her Hope, because that's what she represented, a new beginning, a second chance at happiness. And as I sat in that hospital room, the same hospital where my world had shattered, I realized that sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying the people who hurt you. It's about building a life so beautiful, so full of love, that their absence becomes meaningless. And 6 months after Hope was born, I received a letter from Marcus begging for forgiveness, asking if he could meet his daughter. I read it once, then threw it away, because Hope wasn't his daughter. She was mine, created through my determination, my courage, my refusal to let anyone define my worth. And every time Helen tried to contact me through relatives, claiming she wanted to see her grandchild, I would simply say, "Hope has all the family she needs." And years later, when Hope was 5 years old and asked about her father, I told her the truth in age-appropriate terms, that sometimes people make mistakes, that families come in all different shapes and sizes, and that she was conceived through a special process because I wanted her so desperately. And she looked at me with those wise young eyes and said, "So you chose me specifically?" And I said, "Yes, baby, I chose you with all my heart." And she hugged me tight and whispered, "You're the best mommy ever." And in that moment, I knew that my revenge had been complete, not through cruelty or bitterness, but through creating a life filled with so much love and joy that the people who had tried to break me became nothing more than distant memories. And the last I heard, Marcus was still alone, working odd jobs, Helen had moved to another state to live with her sister, and Claire had married James, and they were raising their child together. And as for me, I was thriving. I had returned to my career in pediatric medicine, I had a beautiful daughter who was my entire world, and I had learned the most important lesson of all, that true strength isn't about holding on to pain, it's about letting it go and building something beautiful from the ashes.